Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the MyCP webinar series, which is our community-focused presentations on CPRN research. We're taking a special tack tonight, and we're going to interview author and mother Lily Collison about her recent book about spastic diplegia, bilateral cerebral palsy. So what I'm going to do first is just do my quick update as sort of what we're about, what CPRN is about, and what MyCP is, and then I'll dive into the interview with me, and then we'll do Q&A. So the mission of the Cerebral Palsy Research Network is to improve outcomes that people with CP value most through high-quality clinical research and quality initiatives. And when I say that people with CP value most, it's because we ran a whole year-long process to gather input from the community, people with CP, caregivers, and clinicians to figure out what was the most important set of issues to work on. And that's a published paper, and that drives the focus of our research and our quality initiatives. CPRN is a bit of a hard thing to conceive of. It's actually not an entity per se, but it's a collaborative network of people, clinicians, therapists, researchers, and institutions, along with patient advocates, working to improve outcomes for people with CP. Our only sort of physical manifestation, besides all the people and the centers we work with, is our data coordinating center, which is based out of the University of Utah in our Department of Population Health Sciences. There are two core pieces of infrastructure, research infrastructure, that make up CPRN. It's a clinical registry, i.e. a database that characterizes people with CP as they visit the hospital and go through annual visits or interventions. And it characterizes them, their interventions, and their outcomes. It's all built into the electronic medical record. And then it's a community registry, which is a registry that allows us to follow both children and adults long-term, even if they're not being seen in a given clinic or whatnot. So June Kales has been very good to make me not use the word patient, but to use the word community member, because not everyone is a patient. So MyCP is a web portal. It's wholly owned and operated by the Cerebral Palsy Research Network. And it's really intended to bring the extended community together for four things. Participation in that community registry through surveys. And so I recognize many of your names. I know many of you have signed up to participate in that. That's great. We also have discussions about research and about evidence-based medicine. So very often people come and post questions about treatments, and we ping various physicians and ask them to comment on what is the, they can't give medical advice online, but they can talk about the state of the art, what's the current evidence base for various treatments. And that's a great service that MyCP provides. And then we provide news about CPRN studies, and we are starting to build out a set of tools that we think will enhance care overall. The first tool is just sign up and determine what your gross motor function classification system number is. And that's a mouthful, but just that key Roman numeral between 1 and 5 that helps.
She wasn't beaten. Don't worry, she went over easy.
Pardon me one second, I'm going to mute.
On the sunny side. She's definitely better played.
Okay, sorry, gonna mute everyone just to minimize background noise, and then I'll unmute you, Lily, in a moment. And then you can sign up for MyCP at mycp.org, and so if you haven't done that, I'd recommend that you do that. So CPRN was built to sort of accelerate research. This is our research pipeline, where at the left we have our funnel of kind of new concepts, and then they move through a process of being reviewed and approved, and then they apply for funding, and then they go on to get implemented and execute as studies. So we have a large number of studies running, both publicly funded studies as well as internally funded studies. And then we try to publish our results. And then we try to feed that back into the front of the sort of registry process to make sure we're always doing the best evidence in implementing our own evidence as well as other evidence from research that has been done. So it's pretty spread out. The green pins are sites that are currently enrolling patients. Yellow ones are preparing the registry. Red are going through some of the compliance steps, and blue are candidate sites. And so we are at 27 sites today. I'll announce another one in the next couple of weeks, and I think we'll be at about 30 sites before the end of the year. So that is a slide from before. So now what I'd like to do is turn towards my my interview with Lily. So Lily, if I can unmute you, I think, if I can find you in my list here. There you go. Okay. You should be unmuted as of this point. Can you comment so I can know that you're there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great.
Good.
Okay. So Lily, let's start out and just if you can just give us a little sense of your connection to cerebral palsy, that will, I think, set a lot of the context here.
Okay. Our youngest son, Tommy, has spastic diplegia. He was diagnosed in Ireland when he was 1, and he's now a 26-year-old living and working in San Francisco. And I suppose it's my journey with him over all those years brought to publishing a book this year on spastic diplegia. Well,
and I will say, you know, I honesty in advertising, as I told you early on, I'm a very slow reader, and I am about a third of the way through the book. I'm waiting for the audio version.
Yes,
I'm a big
that. There's an audio book. You know, we do an audio book for you, Paul. Honestly,
yeah,
we have plans.
So that'll be important, but I think I will get through it. It's just because of my reading challenges, it's just difficult. But I'm very struck by the level of knowledge that you've developed, and I'm curious about your background. What's your sort of educational background besides the mom degree, which is super important in this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The mum degree, as you say. No, I don't have a medical background at all. My background is science. Like, my primary degree was in medical microbiology. But I suppose, when Tommy was first diagnosed, when we received the diagnosis, cerebral palsy, I didn't even know what the term meant. Like, I knew the term, but if you'd asked me to say more than 2 words about it, I wouldn't have been able to. So, it just was my journey started with trying to understand the condition. You know what I mean? That's where I started. I started from zero knowledge, and you just had to come up to speed, because it's a complex condition, and it changes as the child ages. So, I just think us families have no choice but just to get to grips with the condition and understand it. You know. And
so, in terms of how you went about educating yourself, I mean, you've clearly got all these references to lots of great materials. So you've clearly read a ton, but what was your process? Was it on as something was in front of you, you got educated about that, or did you kind of try to garner a sense of the whole thing, or how did you go about it?
Probably, when I started, remember, Tommy was diagnosed in 1995, right? So we're talking about pre-internet days. I started reading books. I used to scour bookshops. Anywhere I traveled, I'd go to look, to find whatever books. So I built up a collection of books, largely at that stage. And that's how I set about educating myself. And I was very fortunate because we had a community, I was living in rural Ireland at the time, we had a community PT who gave me, she had come from Great Ormond Street Hospital, and she'd actually visited at Gillette. So we're talking about the 90s here. But she gave me a copy of Dr. Gage's 1991 book. And for those who don't know Dr. Gage, he was an orthopedic surgeon at Gillette, who now retired. But she gave me a copy of his book. And I read that book. Now, that book was written for orthopedic surgeons, not for the likes of mothers like me, but I read it with a medical dictionary beside it. And I got a lot out of that book, even though to this day I still don't understand all of it at all. But I got a lot of useful information. And then fast forward, Tommy had surgery when he was 9, single event multi-level surgery. And just to kind of keep me learning, I decided to write up his surgery as a research master's. Like I used his surgery as a case study and evaluated like the surgery and the rehabilitation using multiple outcome measures, and just looked at, you know, how does the child judge a surgery as successful? How does the parent, and in this case, the parent was my husband, because like I was the researcher, and then the clinician, and then the teacher, how does everybody judge, you know, that a surgery? And it was just a very interesting study. So that, but the only reason I did it was to learn more, like that, you know, it's sort of a structured learning. So it kind of went on over the years, you know what I mean? You would learn, like the masters helped me a lot, and just my general reading. I was just interested in the subject, and if it hadn't been as complex, you know, like I might have got through it much quicker, but because it's such a complex subject, you know, that's why I stuck with it.
Yeah, so that single event multi-level surgery is, can you just take a moment and explain what that is? And then I've got a question about how you went about making that decision.
Okay, well, single event multi-level surgery like is designed to do all the corrections, the muscle, bone, joint, all the corrections in one sitting, right? And like Tommy had single event Semels, I'll call it Semels for short. He had it when he was 9, and you know, the plan was to set him up as best as possible for adolescents. And like the principle is that, you know, all the corrections are done in a single sitting, in a single surgical event. It's not guaranteed that the child mightn't need further surgery as he goes through adolescence. And in Tommy's case, he did. Like Tommy developed severe knee pain, and when he was 16, he did a further orthopedic surgery. And, you know, a proportion of children who have single event, you know, who have Semels may require further surgery. And in Tommy's case, he did. Like, I hope that answers your question.
It does. So, yeah. But tell me now a little bit about, so I assume that was around 2003, just saying.
2004, he had to.
Okay. So in 2004, the internet is around. Like, how did you go about, as someone who is clearly focused on learning as much as you could about different aspects of this condition, how did you go about making the decision to do that? Like, I assume that surgery took several hours, was quite, you know, and a long time to do rehab. Yeah. How did you go about making the decision?
It was interesting because remember, we're living in Ireland now, you know, so we're coming to the US. So that alone, like coming from the US to, or coming from Ireland to the US is a big deal, you know, for any family. But I suppose how, you know, the decision making for us, like obviously it's a 9-year-old, and the 9-year-old is depending on his parents, you know, like we may later touch on that Tommy had a procedure this year. Tommy is 25, he's the decision maker. But for the 9-year-old, the parent is very involved. And like, I suppose evidence-based medicine is really the clinical expertise of the professional and the evidence from research. So we're talking about 2004. And like, you know, sort of as a family, like the clinical evidence or the clinical expertise of the professional was clearly evident at Gillette. Like they were using 3D gait analysis. They had developed the skill and expertise in choosing which procedures to perform as part of the Semels. They were evaluating outcome, and they were doing a high volume of CP surgery. Like if you want, for whatever, any surgery, go where the volume is being done, you know, be it breast cancer surgery, be it any type of surgery. So the clinical expertise was definitely there at Gillette, you could see that. But also 2004, a number of outcome studies had already been published, you know, showing positive outcome from Semels. Like there were, and this was multiple studies from multiple institutions. Like there were some from Europe, from Austria, from Belgium, and from the US, including from Gillette. And like, you know, sort of, so that, you know, as the scientist in me, that gave me great confidence in making this decision. And the funny thing was, you know, if clinical or if evidence-based medicine is the expertise of the professional and the evidence from research, we had both of them. So to me, it was a no-brainer. Let's go ahead. And like Tommy, I remember having a long discussion with Tommy on it. I can remember where we were going in a car journey, and he saying to me, what do I think? He asked me, do I think he should do it? And I said, yes. And that was enough for him, you know what I mean? And my yes was on the basis of the clinical expertise and the research evidence. But the funny thing is, because that was so strong, we were brave enough to go abroad, and everybody, my friends, the professionals we were seeing, everybody thought we were daft, you know what I mean? We weren't a bit worried. We were, the science was enough to convince me, and the expertise, that was enough to convince me, so we weren't worried.
Did you, pardon me, I've got teenage daughter calling that I have to send off to voicemail. Did you ever have an intervention for Tommy where there wasn't sufficient evidence base, or the evidence base was in conflict? And if so, how did you make that decision?
That's a really interesting and relevant question, because Tommy this year, at age 25, had selective dorsal rhizotomy as an adult, and that's unusual. I wasn't aware, selective dorsal rhizotomy is still not available in our country, and I wasn't aware of it at the time. By the time I had come to Gillette, Tommy already needed orthopedic surgery, so he missed the time opportunity for selective dorsal rhizotomy as a child. So this year he had it, right? And what was interesting, again, he had it at Gillette. Obviously, the clinical expertise was there, but this time the research evidence supporting selective dorsal rhizotomy in adulthood, there's very little evidence. There's 2 studies from one centre, whereas back in 2004, so we're talking about 16 years ago, there were multiple studies from multiple centres. So I would ask the researchers, please, will you do more research around selective dorsal rhizotomy in adulthood?
Right. I know that that's been raised. When I did my webinar last month, that was a comment, there was a lot of discussion among the adults and wanting research in that, that area.
Yeah, and the research you presented last time, there were, as I remember, there were more than 5% of the individuals that you found were adults. 5% of the individuals who underwent selective dorsal rhizotomy were adults. So, I just think it's funny, you're not comparing, 2004 versus 2020. And for this intervention, that there's so little research evidence, it'd be nice to have, it's funny watching my son go through it. It pained me that there wasn't more outcomes, that there weren't more outcome studies. I just was dying that there would be, to see more.
Was he, so he made that decision to proceed with SDR?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And, was he comfortable with the fact that there was not enough evidence, and how did he get comfortable?
Interesting, it's funny, he had a multidisciplinary consult before Christmas. He had the surgery in February, so there was a multidisciplinary PMR, orthopedics and neurosurgery in December. So he asked me, would I come to it as a fly on the wall, and my role was very clear. I was a fly on the wall, and I was actually very happy, because he told me when it was first raised, the possibility of doing SDR, when it was first raised, he actually cranked up his laptop and looked at the latest draft of the book that I had sent him at the time, read the section on SDR, and he felt he really understood it, you know what I mean? And actually, I don't know about any of the audience or you, Paul, our children are our harshest critics, I think, you know what I mean? So when your child tells you, God, you really explained that well, I was very happy with that. But he understood the procedure. The one beauty of going back to Gillette is the continuity of care into adulthood. So Tommy was very comfortable. If the people he has been working with over years now at this stage, he's been coming to Gillette since he was 9, but the one beauty is they have continuity of care into adulthood, right? So, you know, even though, and like I pointed it out to him that the research is very, you know, on outcomes for SDR in adulthood is lacking, but he had the benefit of having great trust in the team, and because, and like when we chose coming to Gillette when he was 9, I wasn't thinking past the next month, you know what I mean?
Right.
I never thought continuity of care into adulthood wasn't on my agenda at all. But, you know, now I see the huge benefit for it, you know, because say when I hand over the baton for, you know, as a parent to your child, you go manage your own healthcare now, you know, for the fact that the child can still go to the same centre makes a big difference, you know, and I only realised that in retrospect.
I want to ask you a question about how you chose Gillette originally, but before I do that, just because I'm realizing the dates on Tommy's SDR are so recent, how's he doing? How's he feel about it?
He's doing great. Yeah, no, he's, Tommy, I think Tom is on this call as well, but Tommy is a tough patient in the sense that he had the SDR on a Friday and he was out sitting up in his wheelchair at dinner on the following Tuesday night. He was, you know, he just bounced back very quickly, no pain meds, everything. He's just a very tough kid when it comes to medical procedures. Like, I feel at this stage, if I have anything, I can never complain about anything. If I'm going through anything medical, there can never be a word out of me, because I've watched Tommy go through so much, and he just is so stoic in, you know, how he gets through it, you know what I mean? Sorry, now I'm losing. You asked me how did I go back?
No, I asked how he's doing, and you're saying he recovered quickly.
Yeah. He's recovering very quickly. Like, he's still using crutches yet, but he's flying around. He was back at work within a month. And the only difficulty is COVID has closed down a lot of services. You know what I mean? That's made it difficult. But he's doing a very good home program. And, like, you know, the full results of SDR in adulthood, as you know, wouldn't be, you know, realised until about a year after the procedure. But you can see already, it's, you know, he's standing straighter, he's walking straighter, like, and he's very pleased that he did it. And, like, it's a big chunk out of, you know, an adult's life. Like, he's to leave work, he's to go do it, he's to be very, you know, it takes him off his feet for a good while. So it's a big investment for an adult, you know what I mean? But he's very pleased he had it done already.
Great. Well, that's good to know. So the question I was going to ask you is, you know, you're in Ireland. It sounds like the first big intervention you did was single event multi-level surgery. How did you find Gillette? Like, what? And you said your colleagues or your other families or other practitioners thought you were daft. Tell me how you found Gillette in the first place.
I suppose the 1991 book, Dr. Gage's 1991 book, you know, sort of was my first introduction to Gillette. And then in 2001, just after 9/11, Dr. Gage spoke at a conference in Dublin, and I was in the audience, and he was presenting a paper there, and I just heard him speak, and just the whole logic of the approach to spastic diplegia, you know, or to spastic CP, you know, the primary problems owing to the brain injury, the secondary problems owing to growth, and the tertiary problems, the coping responses for the primary and the secondary, and just the logic of it and the logical treatment then that followed just spoke to me. And I'm just sitting in the audience that day in 2001. So Tommy is 7 at this stage. I thought, if Tommy ever needs surgery, I'm going to write to Dr. Gage. I just made that decision, you know, no talk of surgery or anything at that time. That was fine. 2 years later, the need for surgery for Tommy was raised. So I wrote to Dr. Gage, and we're talking about no PDFs attached to emails or anything at this stage. You know, it's snail mail we're talking about. So I wrote to Dr. Gage, copied all Tommy's reports and sent them to him, and asked him would he see Tommy. And we went to St. Paul, we went to St. Paul, and then when Tommy was 9, he had his single event multi-level surgery. And like I said, I wouldn't have known that at the time. We were only looking beyond this surgery, or we were only looking as far as this surgery, but I wouldn't have known that, you know, I was walking into somewhere that could offer him continuity of care.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. So tell me, what made you decide to write a book?
I suppose I was painfully aware of how difficult it was to understand spastic diplegia, right? And like, I just remember how I struggled to understand the condition. And like, the point about parents being key influences of outcome was really brought home to me when Tommy was diagnosed. And I wrote about it, if I can find it very quickly, I wrote about it in the book. Like, Tommy had been, like, he cried incessantly when he was born, and then had been labelled developmentally delayed, and there was no diagnosis forthcoming. So I decided to go for a second opinion to a paediatrician who was known to be a straight talker. And like the conversation, I listed the very brief conversation. Paediatrician examines Tommy, and he looks up to me and he says, "Do you not know what's wrong with this child?" And I thought, no. And like that's what I'd come for. And he says, really matter-of-factly, he said, he has cerebral palsy. And what's more, if I want to know how this child will turn out, I don't look at the child, I look at the mother. Yeah. You know, so that's how we got the diagnosis. And like, I wouldn't have known that day, but like now I do believe we parents are key influences of outcome. So if we are, then we need to understand the condition. And then there's a need to educate us parents. You know, if we're to understand this condition, then we need this education. So I wrote the book for families that, you know, for the mother I was struggling to understand the condition, because it took a lot of work to get to that understanding. But I also wrote, like, spastic diplegia is lifelong. So I also wrote it for the adolescents and for the adults, you know what I mean? Like, it's, you know, so it's a book for life for spastic diplegia. And like, you could say, well, were there not good resources available? There are very good books on CP, but CP isn't a single entity, right? There's about 6 subtypes of CP. And like, treating CP as one is kind of like treating cancer as one. Like, if I have throat cancer, only tell me about throat cancer. Don't tell me about anything else. I just want to know about my throat cancer. But also, if I have spastic diplegia, I only want to know about my spastic diplegia. And like, professionals need to know about all subtypes. We parents only need to know about our child's subtype. And like, spastic diplegia is not uncommon. Like, there's about 6 million people worldwide with spastic diplegia. It's one of the most common forms of cerebral palsy. And like, the different subtypes, like, you know, when I talk about 6 subtypes, the different subtypes vary, you know, different severity, their prognosis, the associated health condition, health challenges, and their management plan. And like, if you look, you know, if you read about cerebral palsy, you'll see a long list of possible other problems, you know, a long list, including epilepsy. Epilepsy isn't common in spastic diplegia, yet I, as a mother, reading that list, I don't know which apply to which subtype. So that's why I think it's much more useful. If I have a diagnosis of spastic diplegia, just give me the information for spastic diplegia. Don't confuse me, because I have plenty to worry about there. So I don't want to worry about epilepsy that isn't relevant. So that's why I, you know, wanted this book. And like, I wanted it 25 years ago, like when that pediatrician told me, I look at the mother, I wished he'd handed me this book then, you know. So 25 years later, we could name a book Spastic Diplegia because the title wasn't used, you know what I mean? Yeah. We could, you know, there's no book with spastic diplegia in the title, so we could use that in the title. So I
think that's a great rationale. I really found that compelling in the foreword or the prologue. So I'm curious, so it's pretty thick. And so my question to you would be, should people think of it as a reference guide, or should they think of it as a story with a beginning, middle, and end? Tell me how you think people should think of the book.
It's funny, I had thought about that and I wrote about that in the preface. Like, if, you know, for a family, I recommend that people read the book through to get the, as I call it, the overall picture. You know, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. This gives you the overall picture on the box, right? So read the book through to just get a sense of the condition, and then just dip in, use it as a reference book as you need it. Like Tommy needed to know about selective dorsal rhizotomy. He looked at that section, you know what I mean? So once you, I think it's worth, I actually think, you know, say if, you know, if I was talking to a new family, I would say, read the book through and then do it that way. And like you might say, well, gee, you're not going to frighten them. I think ignorance isn't any better. Like, I think it's much better to know, you know, about, you know, the condition, you know, to have good solid information about the condition. And I think that's less frightening than, you know, the reality.
I know I agree wholeheartedly, but I know you and I are of the same view in that regard. So, well, what are your hopes for the book? What's success look like?
To reach those parents and caregivers who, you cited research in your, what was it, your paper on setting your 2018 paper, Setting a Patient-Centered Research Agenda. You cited a survey from CP Now, if I remember correctly, a survey of over 1,000 parents and caregivers who found that they judged available medical information to be inadequate to guide their decision making. So here are parents and caregivers saying they don't have enough information. And like the life with a child with spastic diplegia, there are a lot of times you have to make medical, you know, you have to be making decisions. You know, like Tommy had, you know, sort of surgery, Semmels, he had surgery at 60, he had SDR in adulthood, you know, so there's a lot. So if you don't have good information, so I wrote it to give those parents and caregivers like you found that information. But also, you know, there was a Dutch study which showed that adults, the biggest unmet need among adults with CP, of young adults with CP, was not services, which you'd expect, it was information about their condition. So you have an adult with a condition and they're saying their biggest unmet need is information about their condition. I think that's shocking. And I wrote that book for those sort of, you know, for those sort of people, for the mother I was, for the adult like Tommy is, all these people, like, and like, even though the book, my primary audience was families, like I also wrote, you know, like it gives a holistic view of spastic diplegia to professionals as well. And like the people who reviewed the book, I was very pleased that they said families should read it, but also professionals should read it, you know, because also it gives the families, you know, sort of perspective on it as well. Like, even though it's a deep medical book that's usually, you know, the information is usually in books for medics, but it also contains a family perspective, and, you know, it gives the holistic story of spastic diplegia. But my primary audience was my families like we were.
Well, so how is it doing, and what are you going to do with the proceeds if it's wildly successful?
Well, like how I would judge wildly successful is reaching the families. Like I said, there's 6 million worldwide, you know, reaching as many families as possible, you know, reaching those adults who want more information about their condition. And like we've been already asked, you know, for it to be translated into Chinese, Vietnamese, and Spanish. Now that was I never thought of, you know, when I was writing a book, you know, I never thought that people would be looking for translations. So, and okay, you want an audiobook too. So like, and I'm delighted that it's reaching, like, never thought of things like the ebook is in Guatemala now, the ebook is in Uganda, you know what I mean? That it's reaching out, you know, and like, okay, COVID times are preventing any in-person events, you know what I mean? So that, you know, that makes it more difficult, but it just makes us like, you know, no more than people with spastic diplegia, they have to rise above every challenge. So no more COVID is a challenge, you know, when you release a book, we just have to rise above it. No, it's doing, we're very pleased with how it's doing. And all proceeds go to research, you know, any proceeds from the book. And I hope there, you know, I hope that it reaches the families, but any proceeds from it are going to research. And one thing, we wanted to keep it as affordable as possible, you know what I mean? Now it's a full, as you keep reminding me, it's a big book, but it's a full color book, like there's lots of illustrations. So like printing a full color book isn't cheap, but you know, so we kept it as at the minimum price possible, but also the ebook is on special offer, $4.99, so that, you know, if you want to find out about spastic diplegia, this information is available for less than the price of 2 cups of coffee. Yeah. And like, that was important. Like, we want to reach families, you know, and like any money can go to research, but the primary thing is reach families.
I think that's great. And I think it's, you know, with how far I'm in, and also, as you know, my wife Lori read the whole thing, and really wishes she had it from the start, and values it, because we're looking at Semmels for my my 15-year-old son. So let me just say, you know, thanks for all of that, but let me open it up to people. And I think the way we should do this is, I think people have the ability to raise hands. So let me see if I'm right about that. Do you have the ability to raise your hand? Maybe we won't do that. So here's what I would say. If somebody types a question into the chat, I will offer you the opportunity to unmute and ask Lily your question so we can make it more personal. And I'm going to start with Cindy, who had a question to you about your son's experience with his SDR. So Cindy, do you want to unmute, or do you just want me to read the question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. That sounds fantastic. And this book, I'll definitely be pushing it for you. I've got a question for Tommy. You know, I always teach cerebral palsy as being a speed-dependent and force-dependent resistance to movement. And I just want to know, did he feel a difference in the resistance once he had SDR?
Yeah, he certainly, he felt less stiffness, okay. You know, he did feel that, you know what I mean, like, you know, he did feel a bit, you know, he did notice, like obviously he had weakness afterwards, but he did notice, you know, a bit more freedom of movement, obviously with the weakness though as well. And like, you know, now that strength has largely been built back up, you know what I mean? But certainly at this point in time, he is happy he's had the, despite the, you know, the investment of time and effort and all that, he's very happy he's had the surgery.
Excellent. You know, I did research on SDR in the 1990s when it first started out, and I was always worked with adults, and I've been trying to push it for adults for a long time. You know, if all those people that have missed out, is it going to be beneficial for them as adults? So Tommy's story is really important. Excellent. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Like I definitely think there's a need for more research, you know what I mean? Because like I'm talking like Tommy's 5 months after surgery. I think there's a, you know, it would be very interesting. And like, as I say, I want those studies as well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Cindy. Kara, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. I was just wondering if there are other interventions that your son or maybe other adults with CP that you've spoken to have found useful in adulthood. You know, I know as an adult with CP, I'm always kind of, you know, looking for things to help me, and I'm very interested to see what other people think.
I would say, Cara, what Tommy found was going to a regular gym, right? And building up his strength, you know what I mean? He found that, like, he just made a conscious decision that he was going to eat the gym, as he said it, and he ate the gym, and he shocked himself with the improvements he saw through getting fit, you know, both improving his fitness levels, but also his muscle strength, you know what I mean? And like, in a sense, it almost became, you know, sort of, you know, sort of self-perpetuating. The more, you know, it really buoyed him on to do more. That's why he was gutted when the gyms closed after, like he had his surgery in February, and the gyms were closed by the time he got back to work in March. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Gyms closed. He is still mourning the fact that the gyms haven't yet opened. You know what I mean? So that's the intervention. I would definitely say once he decided to just go to a regular gym, and he had someone help him tailor a program, he got huge benefit out of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cara.
Okay, let me silence my daughter again. No, not my daughter, but still. Pardon me, didn't put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Well, let me just ask real quickly, just because I think that's such an important question. Dr. Novacek, are there any interventions that are more common in adults with spastic diplegia? Or is there not any kind of body of literature or consistency on that?
Well, thanks, Paul. First of all, I would say that if I've had an opportunity to learn, it was clearly from Dr. Gage, and subsequently listening, especially to parents such as Lily. I've learned so much. The challenge for adulthood is that the body of literature and the level of evidence is markedly less even than the sorrowfully inadequate evidence for pediatrics. So, what I learned is that as a pediatric orthopedist, you wanted to be able to send individuals into adulthood not needing any further surgery, so that if you identified, anticipated, and took care of deformities. In general, we do recognize that the ability for adults to recover, or even later adolescents to recover from surgery, is longer. Whereas a younger child could recover in 9 to 12 months, and older people, it would be 18 to 24 months. Some of the things that have been already said here tonight, Lily stated very well about Tommy's dedication to his exercise program, which he actually started before his SDR and carried through afterwards. Critically important. So when we're seeing individuals as adults, we just have to be very clear with them about what the level of commitment is. It's not just the surgery and the immediate post-surgery, but the length of rehabilitation. Like Tommy, having a career and being self-independent, is challenged in those early times. So they just need to have a clear line of sight about what that means. The challenges with rehabilitation then are so significant that whereas for children, much of that motivation for the recovery comes from parents, now it all has to come from the individual. So judging that level of commitment to the necessary rehabilitation is a critically important part. So there are certainly individuals who are adults who have similar problems, some of whom you might recommend a major surgery, and others you might not because of that risk of a poor outcome from that level of dedication.
That makes sense.
Paul, before Tom, just sorry, can I just jump in there?
Go ahead.
Just say, there would be no book if it weren't for Tom, in the sense, like when I proposed the idea of the book to Tom, like when I proposed the idea that we need this book, you know what I mean? He was on board from the start, right? And like, I can honestly say, without his support for the project, so when I pitched the project to Tom, we need this, you know what I mean? And, but when I pitched it to him, he was on board from the start. And if I hadn't had his support, like, there's no way I could have on my own written this book, you know what I mean? I needed the editorial team at Gillette. But, you know, when I sort of explained to Tom, we need this book for spastic diplegia, you know, he was on board from the start, and he was, you know, his support was invaluable. And like, you know, just the book has been published by Gillette Children's Healthcare Press, you know what I mean, that they, you know, there's this press is very committed to educational materials, to diagnosis specific books for families, you know, so I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to concur. Dr. Novacek is supporting the efforts of the Cerebral Palsy Research Network with development that they're doing there to support another big electronic medical record system, and is offering it up to the other sites. Dr. Novacek and the whole Gillette team are just incredibly supportive. So I think you found a great team, and I think you ended up with a great result. Well, Lily, I'm just going to take one last request to see if you've got lots, if you take a look at chat, you've got lots of really positive comments about what you've done. So take some time and read those. Lots of people appreciate it, and I certainly appreciate it, and we'll finish it before, you won't need an audiobook for me. I will finish it before William gets his Semels, which got delayed due to COVID.
Yes, yeah.
So I see, let's see, changing moving has very challenging. There's changing the response in select direction. Okay, now I'm fighting. Okay, people are just making comments. So any final questions from anyone? If you want to post that you have a question, or you can unmute and ask a question. Well, on a beautiful sunny afternoon on the West Coast, Lily, thank you so much for your time. I know you head back to Ireland soon. I wish you and Tommy safe travels, assuming he's going back to Ireland. I don't know, maybe he stays in the States.
No, he stays here. He works here. He works, lives here. Yeah.
Well,
no,
I wish you safe travels, and thank you so much for the time on the interview and for writing the book. I think it's a great resource for all of us, and I wish you the best of success, because I think it will help us all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.